Hello. Okay. This is Aleppo, Syria. It's also known as Halab in Arabic. This photo was taken February 19th, 2013. A couple of weeks before this photo was taken, I was on the southern border of Syria. I was working in a hospital as a nurse. I had never nursed before. And one of the first patients I had a lot of shrapnel. He had an explosive bullet that had taken apart his left leg and pelvic region. I'm sorry. I sometimes don't remember what it smelled like, and it comes back to me. It smells like burning flesh. That's a humanitarian disaster, right? Everybody would agree on that. It's also a humanitarian disaster when most of the country looks like this today, from the northern parts of Syria to the southern. When Syria is a textbook example of chemical weapons attacks in the 21st century, when the majority of people, when you ask them about Syria, the first thing they tell you is that's where ISIS is, right? And they forget that that's also where all these people are. Civilians, normal people. As one student mentioned, it's easy to forget that there's normal people going about their lives there. Syria now entered its 7th year of war. It has officially surpassed World War II. It's also the worst man-made human disaster since World War II. I preface this because I want you to understand that what a humanitarian disaster means is very important, right? To identify one. And that's my job. I work for a nonprofit, Promise for Relief and Human Development. I've worked with them for over 7 years now. I've also gone to the mountains of Lebanon on the border of Syria, where it's across from Homs, where you regularly have clashes between the Lebanese army and ISIS or other extremist figures across the border. And no one wants to go there. NGOs don't want to go there. And so I'll go there because people are freezing to death because there's thousands of refugees and they don't have resources. And so I've worked on projects where we take medical supplies, insulin, where we'll take winter jackets and gloves and space heaters, where we'll take food. We'll open up a warehouse and start packaging food for people and delivering it to them personally to make sure that the hungry eat. And yet, when I tell people the real solution is this, it's libraries, it's schools, it's books. When I tell them this is what we need in Syria, they look at me skeptically as if I don't know what a human disaster looks like or a human crisis. I understand what this looks like because, this is where my family lives, right? They still live. This is where they fled from. This is a very familiar image in our family's group chat. This is the solution because it is a crisis when the majority of students and children and young adults are not in school. Why? Because you get images like 7-year-old Ahmed, which was the image immediately before. You might have seen that picture because it's been plastered across magazines and newspapers in the United States. Because people find this shocking. This is a 7-year-old child holding an AK-47, manning a barricade in the streets of Aleppo, smoking a cigarette, looking like he's probably 50 years older than he really is. 7 years old. I have a 7-year-old brother, right? I get upset if he plays Call of Duty. This is a human crisis because Ahmed should be in school. He should be in a classroom. And you know what you need for a classroom? You need maybe a few books and a dedicated teacher, and teachers in Syria are doing that. Why? Because kids who aren't in school are more likely to be trafficked, more likely to be exploited, more likely to be turned into child labor, and they're more likely to be recruited for armed groups. So if you care about national security and counterterrorism, you should care that most kids are outside of school. You should care the fact that most young adults have no critical thinking skills. That matters. If you care about young men joining extremist forces because they need a salary to support their families, you should be supporting projects to get them into colleges because they will. They'll go. I know that because we have students. I know personally students that left whatever brigade that they were fighting for because they had a secure future and they worked with us and studied for 2 years, and we had 250 students graduate this past October. And now they're teaching in local elementary and middle schools. Because Noor here is 13 years old. She's from Raqqa in Syria. She's married to a 27-year-old in Lebanon as a refugee. And her parents will say we would not have married her off had we been able to economically provide and protect her. Because of the fact that 47% of Syrian women who are married were child brides. Why? Because not being in school and not working leaves you as a burden. And unfortunately, in war, you need to survive. So if you care about the fact that young girls are being married off, and that the only statistically significant thing, right, that makes a difference in a woman's life, that she lives longer as a mother, that her children live longer, that her children go to school, and that she's not a victim of sexual domestic abuse, is if she goes to school. But that's hard to believe. That's where Noor should be, because she's really good at math. She should be in a classroom somewhere. This is Maryam. When people tell me, no, what we really need is more insulin and mobile clinics and healthcare, we have a healthcare problem, a crisis, right? We don't have enough doctors and nurses. That's why we want people like you to come and help nurse. I tell them, no, you don't. Because you have girls like Maryam, who is a medical student, and the only reason she stopped her medical studies is because she couldn't get to campus safely. But if you put her back in school, in a few years, you have a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist, and she wants to go back to school. And so she joined the medical sciences program, and she wants to study public health. Syria's war has been going on for 7 years plus now. The average conflict, civil war, takes 17 years. This is an emergency if you don't have doctors and nurses, but in the time and the money that we've spent sending people or doctors from America and Europe on 2-week mission trips, we could have educated 200 students. This was our class of graduates. These are the women who graduated and who will now be teaching, as are these young men. And this is Ahmed, one of our students. He's from Homs. He was displaced to the southern province where he attends college. So if you care about recruitment for extremist organizations or military organizations, if you care about young women's futures and their health, if you care about the medical crisis, then kids not being in school is a crisis. That is an emergency that we have to address. The fact that less than 2% of humanitarian aid goes to education tells us something, right? Because this isn't considered a humanitarian response. And I know this because I've had these conversations. I'll come back from the refugee camps, I'll come back from working with people, and I'll come to the United States and talk to organizations, I'll go to Capitol Hill, I'll join political action committees, and I tell people we really need to be supporting education projects in Syria. And you know what they tell me? They tell me, no. We're interested in like emergency humanitarian things like food and water and medical care. That's development work. Education will have to wait till after the war, probably around 10 years after the war. As if we can afford to wait. As if learning is a luxury that we can afford to forego right now. And the thing is that we can't wait. If you think that human beings can live on food and water alone, you're mistaken. Walk into any refugee camp and you'll be hoarded by mothers who are telling you, how can I get my kid into one of these classes or into a school or secure them a future? Talk to any of these patients, any of these young men, and they'll tell you, if I had an option at a degree, an online degree, any sort of degree, I would jump at it in a moment. Because humans need more than water and food to survive. More than that to live, they need something to live for. So we need to stop thinking about education as some sort of a development, as some sort of a luxury thing. It's a humanitarian crisis when kids are in school, and it can't wait because learning is not a luxury. This is a conversation that needs to change. Thank you.